Welcome to the Sharing Without Shame podcast, dedicated to parents and anyone else who loves someone in active addiction. Education is a powerful tool in breaking down stigma, fostering understanding, and ultimately helping individuals and their loved ones navigate the challenges of addiction. With Donna Marston, author of Peeling the Onion and Sharing Without Shame. So take a deep breath and grab some tissues as we uncover the stories of love, courage, and unwavering support in the face of adversity, as Donna and her guests share their stories without shame. Because when we share our stories without shame, we inspire others to do the same.
Hello and welcome. Today's podcast is sponsored by Snap Bands. It's Snap Therapy. The cognitive behavior therapy bracelet integrates gentle physical sensation with personalized mantras, cues to instantly transform unwanted negative thoughts into positive mental focus, which is stigma-free. You can visit www.snappbandz.com and go to special notes and type in SWOS for sharing without shame. Today I'm talking with Lianna Purjes, who is a licensed clinical social worker who works with adult children of alcoholics to help them master the tools and strategies needed to build healthy and long-lasting relationships. So welcome, Lianna.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
First question I like to ask is, what would you like to share without shame?
So this is something that I used to feel a lot of shame about, but I don't anymore. So when I first found out about my mother's addiction issues, I was very angry with her for many, many years. And I had some pretty, I guess at the time I thought dark thoughts about her. And, I was in a place where I was constantly worried about her and her safety. So I had some thoughts at the time about, maybe life would be easier if she weren't alive anymore. And at the time, I felt a lot of shame about even thinking it. But now it's something I've just come to accept as just kind of a side effect of this terrible disease.
And is she still active?
She unfortunately passed away almost 2 years ago now.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Because of her addiction?
Yeah, she had an overdose.
No.
Yeah.
It's a horrible thing.
It is. It's really sad.
So you work in the field, and your niche is other children who have parents who are in active addiction or alcoholism. So can you explain what it means to be an adult child of an alcoholic and how that your upbringing can impact your ability for healthy relationships?
Yeah. So an adult child of an alcoholic is just as an adult, anyone who grew up in a home with alcoholism or addiction. It's become kind of a common term to describe anyone who grew up with addiction or even other kinds of like very significant family dysfunction. And, it's interesting. I think everyone has different stories, right? So some people as children were very aware of what was going on in the home, and other people only find out about it later as adults and look back and think, oh, well, that kind of explains a lot of things.
Right.
That was my case. I didn't know until I was an adult. But yeah, I think overall it can have a huge impact on our adult relationships. We, as children, we know this from research that we learn how to communicate our needs, if it's safe to communicate our needs. We attach, all these things that happen in early childhood, primarily in the birth to age 5 range. So a lot of the issues we develop during that time frame in our lives can show up for us in our adult lives, whether we realize it or not. And it's interesting. I have found, I think, the big ways it shows up for most people is in ways that they probably never would attribute to how they grew up. It just, they start noticing patterns in their relationships that are dysfunctional or not satisfying. And then eventually we get to making this connection to the childhood.
So is it typical when you grow up with a parent or parents who are active in their addiction? I'm sure there's some that are very nurturing and, they function well, but then there's some that just are emotionally detached. Is there one way more common than the other, or does it just kind of varies across the
I mean,
board?
yeah, it's a great question. I think it can vary quite a bit, but I'd
Mhm.
say more often than not, there is some emotional detachment and some discomfort with acknowledging feelings and feeling feelings that is modeled for the children. Because what we know about addiction for most people struggling with substance use, they're trying to numb the discomfort or the distressing feelings or whatever it is. So, because they're doing that, whether it's explicit or not, they're modeling that behavior for their kids. So then what happens is, a lot of times these kids grow up not feeling safe or comfortable, even acknowledging their own feelings. And then that just carries into adulthood.
And I would imagine some act out. That's how they
Mhm.
may not, especially when kids are little, they don't have the verbal skills, so they're going to act out.
Yep.
Bad behavior or being whiny or clingy, or it's going to show up somehow.
Yeah, every child is different, so it just depends. But yeah, some kids will react in those outward ways, kind of externalizing behaviors with they could be physically aggressive, there could be a lot of tantrums, there could be getting in trouble in school. They can, as they get into, their teenage years, they could end up experimenting with alcohol and substance use themselves. And for some kids, it's almost the opposite. They internalize everything. So for some kids, it becomes just a lot of high anxiety or
Mm,
depression and
mm,
things like that, a lot of fear. And so that those cases, it's probably a little harder to notice.
mm. Yeah. So, what are some common patterns or behaviors that adult children of alcoholics exhibit in their relationships, and how do these patterns start? Does it start at a typical age, or how does that move forward as the kids grow?
So, it can look a lot of different ways. I think, in my experience, what I've seen is for most people, we end up kind of playing out our attachment issues in our adult relationships, whether that's romantic relationships or, friends, family, colleagues, whatever it is. So I think for a lot of people, what that looks like is kind of this push and pull, this game, and it's going on internally. It's not conscious, right? Like most people don't get into relationships thinking, okay, I'm going to put myself on an emotional roller coaster and I'm going to play some games here, right? Like nobody wants to do this. But I think that's what ends up happening subconsciously is that we're testing. We're testing the waters to see, are you safe? Because we want closeness, we want to find someone safe. But then if someone gets too close to us, we'll pull away a little bit because that kind of closeness, that emotional intimacy is very scary because it's so unfamiliar. So, I think what I see a lot with people is this push and pull, and then and having also having a really hard time setting boundaries, sticking up for themselves, a lot of people pleasing tendencies, like I remember, before I did a lot of this work for myself, I was in a place where someone would ask me, can you do XYZ? And I would just automatically say yes. I mean, it didn't even occur to me until hours later that I could have said no. It was just I was on autopilot. So I think a lot of that kind of stuff is the stuff we see in those adult relationships.
So, when there's alcoholism or addiction in the family, everybody takes on a role,
Hmm.
right? Typically, depending on how many children there are, they all take on a role. Have you ever identified that for yourself, what role that you took on?
Yeah, I think I was the responsible
The hero?
the hero, parent, whatever you want, different names. But yeah, I definitely was. I was the oldest
I
child.
was going to say, you're the oldest girl.
I'm the oldest, yep, and only two kids, but still I was the oldest. And yeah, I definitely took on that role. And even in, my young adult life, even after I wasn't living with my mother anymore, I still went through a pretty significant phase where I was trying to literally take care of her, that I would go to her apartment and, buy her groceries and clear out all the liquor bottles and, try to clean up and take care of her. That was, yeah, I just kind of naturally fell into that.
Well, you become the adult, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's another word for it, as we call it, parentified children, when the kids end up taking on the role of the parent, either literally by, cooking, cleaning, taking care of things, or even emotionally by being the ones who have to hold emotional space for the parent.
And so I don't like to call parents codependent or enabling. So the language I use is the unhealthy helper because
Mhm.
it's all in the name of love.
Oh, of
And,
course.
and it's blaming and shaming when you're codependent and you're an enabler and you're this and you're that. So unhealthy helping, I find when I say that to people, their bodies relax a little bit. They're not going to be blamed for loving their kids. Do you feel that with being a child of an alcoholic, and I don't like that language, but a person with alcoholism,
Hmm.
I think that sounds better, that you take on that role of being the unhealthy helper as well?
Oh yeah, I think I definitely did. I mean, not everyone does. Every family is different, every individual is different. I've worked with some people who didn't take on that role. But I think probably more often than not we do, because like you said, it's comes from love and you care about this person, you worry about them and their safety and their health. And so it's just instinct to try to jump in and help.
Hmm. Yeah. And then, there's all these other ones, the scapegoat, the lost child, the like family clown or mascot. And from what I know, I didn't grow up around people who had a substance use disorder, but it seemed to me having a child, it's like the roles kind of would interchange sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I might be the scapegoat and be really angry, and the scapegoat can be the truth teller,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I in my work with clients, I don't really try to have them figure out their label or, whatever role they played, because it changes and it can shift quite a bit. And I think to an extent, growing up like that, we all play each of those roles at least for a little bit, because things are a little chaotic emotionally. So it's messy.
So that wouldn't be part of the healing process to maybe identify some of the toxic behaviors that would come forward when you're loving a parent?
No, I definitely look at behaviors. I just don't really spend too much time thinking about the different labels.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you hit on the hurt and you bring
Oh
that
yeah.
forward so that they can understand it, see it, know what to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So how would you describe a healthy relationship?
Oh, that's a great question. I think of a healthy relationship, and when I think of any type of relationship, I think of it as being one where there's mutual respect,
Hmm.
where both people care about each other and how the other person is feeling. And when both people are coming to the table to compromise and try to, make adjustments to help the relationship sustain and grow.
Hmm. And relationships, sometimes one person gives more than the other at times. It's not always 50-50. Sometimes
Mhm.
it might be 60-40, but I think it's moving forward. And as you navigate, especially in a partner to partner, husband, wife, whatever, relationships, and then there's children that come along. It's just finding the balance and seeing, how it's going to work. It ebbs and flows. It
Oh,
changes
absolutely.
over the years. And, like I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was the one who did the laundry and the cooking and all this stuff. And now that my husband's semi-retired, he loves to do laundry. So he's taken on some of those roles, right? That's great. I love that. So there's that, he gives in some areas that are really helpful to me, and I'll do other stuff for him. And I think it's people learning how to navigate that.
Yeah, and I think like you said, it's, very rarely 50-50. And that's okay that it changes and ebbs and flows. And I think the point is over a long period of time, do you feel like it's relatively equal? And I always tell people, don't keep score, don't keep points, don't, go tit for tat, all that stuff. When you get caught up in all those little things, you just drown in it. It's just too much. And it's too much for any human to live up to those expectations. So yeah, I mean, I think you make a great point about it's about finding that balance. And I think it's also about finding that balance when it comes to emotional support too, right? Like sometimes I'm the strong one when my husband's going through a hard time and I'm the one comforting him and the focus is on him and his needs. And then other times it's reversed and he's comforting me when I'm going through a hard time. And I think just as long as we have some kind of balance there, where it doesn't feel like it's too off kilter, then you're in a good spot.
And I think sometimes, and I learned this very late in life, and I wished I learned it so many years ago, that when we're kids, and we have a trauma, and loving parents can cause traumas.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody, no matter who you are, you probably had some sort of trauma, whether it's from a teacher, a playmate, a parent. And so what I realized, and I wonder how often this happens with people who grew up with somebody who was sick and suffering, is that I came to realize that if I'm dismissed by especially my husband, this 5-year-old shows up and acts out. And I didn't understand it for many years. And then I understood that when I was 5, I was dismissed at my birthday party because someone was opening my gifts and I asked my mom, and, long story short, but, and she dismissed me and said, don't worry about it, let it go. And so that 5-year-old shows up. How do you help your clients understand those type of things? Do you ever ask, when they're going through whatever the story is that they're telling you, do you ever ask them how old they are?
It's interesting because people don't always have a lot of conscious memories from childhood, especially when you've grown up in a home with some addiction. So, that part can be tricky at times when people really don't have much memory, but it can be helpful to know that if they do remember, because then we can kind of pair that with what part of the brain is developing the most at that time. And, so that can give us at least some clues as to why they might be reacting in their adult life in the way they do. But yeah, I think I talk a lot with clients, give a lot of education about brain development in childhood, about trauma and how that impacts the brain, do a lot of education about the stress response in the human brain and nervous system regulation and all these things, because I think you need that context to truly be able to understand, oh, okay, that's why I turn into this 5-year-old and act this way when I'm, in my 40s and 50s, right? Like, because otherwise, without that context, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, because it's hard to understand. I would always wonder, like, why do I act like that after it would be over? And what I had to learn and, self-taught was when I identified what happened, I would say to him, please don't dismiss me. I'm trying to tell you something and I find it hurtful. So let's, have a conversation, but please don't dismiss me. So I had to act like an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's also, I think, but, again, like you mentioned earlier, it's not a conscious choice, right? Like it's just this reaction. It's just this visceral thing that comes out of you. And that's probably because you had some experiences in early childhood where you were dismissed. And so you're going to be a little extra sensitive to those kinds of situations as an adult.
Yeah, it's just, it's mind blowing how so much we carry. We have this cart behind us and we just keep carrying all the crap
Yeah.
until there comes a time in life, no matter what it is, that we're able to identify, like, yeah, there's more to this, and look at some healing, and you start to unpack it and start unloading it, so it's not so heavy. You're not carrying around all this baggage.
Yeah, and it's hard to do, right? I mean, it's, if you're still living in a state of some kind of traumatic environment or a place where you don't feel emotionally safe most of the time, you're not going to be in a place where you can do that work most of the time, you know. I think of it as like if you break a bone, you put it in a cast, you let it heal, you protect it and let it heal. And then, years later, is that bone going to be more sensitive to breaking again than the rest of your bones? Yes, because it had that trauma, right? And
Mm,
it's the same thing emotionally, right? Like we have these sore spots from early on in life, and we absolutely can heal them, but they're still going to be a little sensitive.
right. Yeah. And I'm sure there's some people that are just always in that fight or flight mode, right? They
Mm-hmm.
just can't even get there because of they've had so much trauma, so much dysfunction in their lives, that they're just constantly on guard and moving forward and defensive. And how do you work with somebody like that?
Yeah, so really the first step is working on regulating the nervous system, hold trauma in our bodies.
Mhm.
So even if we don't have conscious memories of things, because I mean, you could experience trauma as an infant. You're not going to have a conscious memory of it. You were too young, but our body will still remember. So it's a lot about learning to recognize those body sensations and what the body is doing and what it's reacting to, and then learning how to regulate through it so that the person has resources, they're well resourced to deal with the triggers that come up in everyday life. And once they're well resourced with a lot of tools to use to kind of deal with those triggers, then that's when we can kind of dive into, all right, let's unpack what happened, let's get into that a little deeper.
So, how would you define a toxic relationship?
That's a good question. I think it can look a lot of different ways. I think in general, I would define a toxic relationship as one that has unhealthy patterns that one or more people are noticing and not willing to change. Because we all have some unhealthy patterns or behaviors or tendencies, like we all do. I'm a therapist and a coach, and I do too. I have my moments of human. The point is, can we look at it later and identify it as not being healthy and say to ourselves or the other person, okay, I shouldn't have handled it like that. I should have done something different and work on changing it. To me, a toxic relationship is when those things are happening and one or both people know it and they don't feel like they should change it.
Yeah, and that's tough. And trying to get, fix it, and if one person starts to identify and realizes it, and the other person's in denial, it can be a really difficult situation that may not be able to move forward. And,
Yeah, and it's tough, right? Because we all have our own needs and wants, especially as we get older, we get much more particular about things. And so it can be hard for us to really put ourselves in the other person's shoes and understand where they're coming from. Even if it's something, simple like how you clean the house, how often you clean, or something like that, doing laundry, whatever, right? But if for one person, it might seem like this silly little chore that doesn't matter, whereas for the other person, maybe it really matters to them. We don't know.
mhm.
If that person is saying, "Hey, I know you don't see it, and that's fine, but this is really important to me. It really hurts me when you do X, Y, Z. Can we please work on changing it?" And their reaction to hearing this hurts me is, no, that's stupid. I'm not going to even care about it. That could be a big red flag.
And I would think having those conversations in a toxic relationship can be very similar to having almost an intervention for
Mm-hmm.
someone who's in active addiction, right? When you go at them and go, well, you do this and you do that and blah, 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 blah. There's a way of
Mm-hmm.
handling all that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is when you did this, it made me feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
That how someone would approach for an
Absolutely.
intervention or a
Yeah.
relationship, fixing a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about the feelings because again, it's, we, as humans, we value different things at different priority levels. And so something that's important to me may be silly to my husband. He may not care either way. So it's important to communicate when this happens, this is the effect it has on me. This is how I feel. Because feelings are never wrong. They just are what they are. And because of that, can we work on a different solution?
Hmm. Right, and which could be going to counseling together.
Hmm. Yeah, could be a lot of things.
Yeah. So, in your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges that adult children of alcoholics face when trying to build a healthy relationship?
I think, like I said before, like that push and pull that happens, I think we overall, everyone's different, obviously, but I'd say overall, we tend to attach emotionally to people very quickly because we so very much want that. We want that closeness and that emotional intimacy. And, sometimes that can work out fine, but other times it can kind of blow up in your face. I went through many, many, many short-term relationships in my adult life with guys who basically would tell me, you're too needy. I can't handle it. Uh,
Mm,
at the time, that hurt me deeply, deeply, deeply. I mean, it was talk about shame. I mean, I internalized all those comments. And, I think I think some of it was sometimes I was probably choosing the wrong people, but I think also
mm,
I probably was a little too, I don't like that word needy, but I probably was a little bit because I needed to feel loved just like we all do. We all need to feel loved and feel safe and feel valued. And I wasn't really getting it anywhere else in my life. So that's why I, probably acted the way I did was that I was just trying to fulfill a basic human need, just like the air we breathe or water we drink. And the problem is, it just wasn't working out. And, I think that can be a big issue. So a lot of the work I do with clients is trying to have them slow down a little bit and really reflect and think about, is this a need I should be asking this person to fulfill for me, or is this a need I can fulfill in some other way? So that nobody has all of their needs in life fulfilled by one person. That's why we have friends and family and spouses and colleagues and all sorts of different types of relationships. So it's a lot about slowing down and really examining, where is this urge coming from? And let me sit on it for a minute and then decide to act later rather than being impulsive. So I think that's a big thing that comes out. I think also for a lot of adults who grew up in homes with addiction, they don't often have the communication skills that they need as adults to have healthy relationships. I think the example you gave earlier of like when your 5-year-old came out of you, right?
mm,
It's those reactions happen so easily and quickly with kids who grow up with these attachment issues in childhood. So, it's a lot again about slowing down and working on how can I best communicate my needs so that I can actually get my needs met. Because yeah, I can go up to my husband and start yelling at him right now. I could, right? I could go yell at him right now and be like, you're all these things. But at the end of the day, is that going to be effective? Probably not, right? So
right, right.
it's about, so my role in it is I have to work on regulating my own emotions so that when I do go approach him about something, I'm able to use more productive language and talk about my feelings rather than just coming out with this inner child reactivity.
Mm. And doesn't it all come down to, I know people, this is my understanding, when people are in active addiction, it's about self-love. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
it. It's that disconnection, right? They don't feel loved, so they don't love themselves. It doesn't matter whether you have an SUD or not. Everybody deals with self-love, one way
Mm-hmm.
or the other. And so some people are just looking for love in all the wrong places. Just
Mm-hmm.
anybody to love them, right or wrong. That's
Yeah.
all they need. And this is my opinion, that when we don't love ourselves, nobody can ever love us enough.
Mm. Yeah.
Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some truth to that. It's when we don't love and respect ourselves, we will still seek it out, but yeah, we'll never kind of satiate that urge or that need. Nothing will ever be quite enough. And it's hard, we are as humans, we're pack animals. We're meant to live in packs of other humans, in groups, in tribes, whatever you want to call it. And so it's natural and it makes sense that we're seeking this out.
Mm,
It should be. So that urge is so normal, and I like to normalize that with people too. Like your need for love is 100% normal and expected. It's just, like you said, it can get more complicated when we don't have that secure base in childhood, that secure attachment that tells us you can look for it, but you also need to love yourself.
hmm And that's tough.
It's hard. Yeah, it's
I
really hard.
remember doing this spiritual group, and they passed around a mirror, and everybody had to look in the mirror and say their name and say, "I love you, Donna." And most of the women couldn't do it. It was
Yeah.
really hard, and
Mhm.
it was just an eye opener to me. And the more I got into dealing with addiction and seeing what goes on, and I just hearing the stories of the abuse and the neglect that
Mhm.
people have, or the horrible, horrific things that their parents say to them, and and they're still trying to function and get through life and do the right thing, but they're so beaten down. It's like, how do you help somebody like that? What kind of coping skills or conversations do you have with somebody like that, so they can really pick themselves up, stand up tall, and just go forward, because they didn't cause this.
Right, right. It's hard. It takes a lot of work. It takes some time for sure. It is not an overnight fix, but it definitely can be done. I look at myself as an example. I have come leaps and bounds from where I was when, I was in my early 20s, and that time of my life, I really struggled a lot with my own sense of self-worth. It was really low. And I think a lot of it is, primarily through relationships, whether that's, personal relationships or your relationship with a therapist or a coach or a community, a support community, whatever it is. We know from research that the best way to heal trauma, especially relationship trauma, is through healthy relationships. So again, it takes some time, but it absolutely is therapeutic when we start to develop a close and healthy relationship with someone and we start to see how much they care about us. We start to internalize that instead of what we internalized as children, which was more of the negative stuff that was going on. So, it takes a lot of that work. And I work with clients too on using certain strategies like positive affirmations and some behavioral exercises to try. Because I think a lot of the time too, we get stuck in our heads. It's very easy to get into this negative thought spiral, and it's hard to get into the positive one. So it just takes a lot of practice. As humans, we learn by practicing and through repetition. So we just got to keep at it, and eventually it starts to become more natural. And over time, it absolutely improves.
hmm Do you have any advice I have a lot of parents. I have a Facebook page called Family Sharing Without Shame. And there's quite a few of the parents that are raising their grandchildren now.
Mm.
And how would a parent approach their children who are in active addiction who have children? Because that's a dynamic that's it's like walking on a tightrope.
Oh yeah, very, very, very tricky. I think like you were mentioning earlier, if you want to do an intervention, then come from a place of your feelings and, your concerns. If we start to get into language of that could even be interpreted as criticizing, even if it's not how we mean it, immediately the defensive walls will go up most of the time, and then they're not open to hearing it. So I would say really just try to come from a place, just talk about, I'm worried about you, I love you, I'm concerned for your kids, all these things, and just see if they're open to talking about it more. And really, that's all you can do. We can't force people to get help if they don't want to get help.
Yeah, well, I learned the hard way that I couldn't love my son into recovery. And I
Mm.
was fortunate he was young, that there wasn't any children or a significant other or anything. It was just him, which made it a little bit easier because some of the families that I work with, they have multiple children that are in active addiction and keep having babies, and it just creates a cycle that's just ongoing. What type of coping skills do you offer
Mhm.
for people who are just wanting to heal and identifying that they grew up with parents who are in active addiction, alcoholism?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do a lot of work with clients on, again, education about what is happening neurologically when they experience stress. So they have that context of, why they have these symptoms. There's a reason that, I mean, everyone has slightly different symptoms and reactions, of course, but there's a reason that when you're triggered, your heart rate starts increasing and you might feel flush or sweat or, things like that. These are physiological processes happening because of what's going on in the brain. So I think it's helpful to understand that process. And, in terms of coping skills, it's a lot of trial and error of figuring out what's going to work for that individual. What works for one person is going to actually make someone else more anxious. So
Right.
we just, it's not easy in the beginning, but it's well worth it once we find the right fit. And yeah, I talk to clients about, we have like top down and bottom up strategies. So top down being more cognitive based. So things like positive affirmations or gratitude exercises, anything that's, more thinking based. And then bottom up exercises are body or sensory based. So that can be things like lighting scented candles, wrapping yourself up in a blanket, taking a hot shower, like anything involving the five senses. So, we just explore. It's a lot of exploring and just normalizing for clients that sometimes it takes some time to find the right fit, but that's
Mhm.
okay because finding the right fit is the most important thing.
Now, would somebody who really feels abandoned, I don't know why, I just had this thought come in. I know nothing about it.
Mhm.
Would, for example, like weighted blankets be of comfort to them because it just encompasses them, and maybe it gives the sense of somebody else being there, being held?
Yeah, for a lot of people, it will give that sense, can be very comforting. But again, everyone's different. I've known some people that say they don't like the weighted blanket, like sensory wise, it just doesn't feel right for them, and that's okay. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, especially if you grew up with a lot of trauma in your home, that can be very comforting. And anything that feels nurturing is what I usually recommend. I worked in grad school. My first internship was working in this therapy program, doing therapy for toddlers and their parents who had experienced significant trauma. And one thing we did was for the parents that came in, we would always offer them some coffee or hot chocolate or snacks. And when I first started there, I wasn't sure exactly what the purpose of that was. And someone explained to me, well, it's so we can nurture them because a lot of these people didn't, most of the time, they didn't get nurtured as children. And so we're almost like re-parenting them in a way, in a very subtle way to say, hey, I care about you. I notice you. Would you like a hot drink? So sometimes even like small little things like that can be really effective too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. One of the things I do, I have a workshop where we do journaling, but they cut out pictures of sayings or people or there's and I offer some of them, but it's kind of taking your emotions and finding positive affirmations and putting them out there, and they put them in these books, and then I have them do artwork and write or draw, and it just it's a little bit of like a ball of confusion, but it really it creates these stories, and as they go through this journal, and finish it, it just you see the process of growth and letting go, and how it starts off with maybe some negative stuff to the positive, and you again you see the growth. So I think that's kind of a cool thing to offer people as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great too to engage that like creative side too.
Yeah, and I learned too, creative journaling. One of the things, now this is something I learned that I think could be really beneficial with the clientele that you work with, is they write a letter to the person who hurt them in they play both sides. They, right? And so so my thing when I did it with my inner child. And I would ask a question and she would answer me. And as it went on, there was just things that came out. It was really interesting. So I think that could be a technique that people can use too.
Yeah.
Write a letter to the person who hurt you. And I had a friend a few years ago that did this process. She had done something that was pretty mean, and I had everything to do but hang up on her. But because I love her, I didn't. But I couldn't even look at her for a few days. And about a week later, she called and said, can you talk? And I said, sure. And she said, I knew when I said what I said, I was wrong, but I didn't know why. It took her all week writing this letter to me, but having me write it, and she was the writer. And in the end, she found out her fear showed up, and so she was taking her fear out on me.
Oh, wow.
So she identified that. I
Yeah.
thought
That's pretty powerful.
right? Yeah, and when those things happen, I think that brings people closer together.
Yeah.
Because they own their stuff.
Yeah.
It's not you, it's me. And I'm sorry.
Yeah. Acknowledgement is huge. Huge, huge, huge. We have to acknowledge when we mess up. It's okay that we mess up. It's normal. We just have to name it and acknowledge it. And that's sometimes even bigger than an actual apology, is just saying, well, I screwed up.
Yeah. It's huge. So as we wrap up, do you have any words of wisdom that you would like to leave people with?
Yeah, I would say keep working at it. It's hard work, right? This is not easy. There's no question about that. If it were easy, everyone would do it. But keep at it. It's worth it. It's 100% worth it. And I can say that professionally, as a clinician, as a coach, and personally as a human who has been through it. There have been times that, I've sat in someone's office bawling my eyes out. There have been times that I've really not wanted to leave the house. I was so depressed. You go through a lot of stuff. It's hard. And it's absolutely worth it once you start to see the improvements in your life. As hard as the work has been for me, and I'm still working on myself. No one's perfect. I still have stuff I need to work out. I wouldn't go back and change it for anything. I am so much happier in my life now than I ever was before I started doing this work. So yeah, just, acknowledging it, naming it, it's hard, but don't give up.
Yeah, so blessings can come out of what felt like a curse.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And now, do you do coaching like on the internet or do you just do it in Colorado?
Yeah, so therapy I only do in Colorado and Florida where I'm licensed as a therapist. But coaching is something I can do with anyone in the world. So I have a group coaching program that I work with anyone who grew up in a home with addiction, who's looking to build really healthy relationships, really learning the concrete skills you need to in terms of communication and setting boundaries and things like that to really make it happen. So I run a group coaching program called Resentment to Resilience. And I have a Facebook group where it's kind of the hub for our community where we all support each other. And I give lots of resources and I do free trainings and things like that. So yeah, so that's my coaching thing is global.
Awesome. So how would people get in touch with you to join that group?
Yeah, you can look for my group on Facebook. If you just search Adult Children of Alcoholics Building Healthy Relationships, that's the name of the group. You can also visit my website, coachingwithlianna.com, Lianna, and all the information is also there.
Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to support the Sharing Without Shame podcast, please subscribe, like, and leave a review. If you're in need of emotional support, Donna offers private sessions. For more information about Donna and the services she offers, visit www.sharingwithoutshame.com or email her at Donna4support@comcast.net. Nothing in the Sharing Without Shame podcast is intended to establish a therapist-patient relationship or intended to replace the services of a trained therapist, doctor, or health professional, or substitute for professional mental health, medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Until next time, may your faith and strength heal your heart.